pleased to be here because in the days before I had political retirement thrust upon me by the Canadian electorate, I enjoyed the support of many members of the Ismaili community. And one of the things that always struck me was not only its dynamism, but the sophistication of the community. Two things struck me. One was the extraordinary accomplishments of the women of the community. And it was very clear to me that this was a community where women were expected and encouraged to achieve and develop themselves. I was also very struck by the quality of the work that you do around the world through the Aga Khan Foundation. And I remember a number of years ago, there was an excellent display of this in Vancouver. We were trying to figure out where it was because it wasn't here, it was somewhere else in the city. One of the people that I became very good friends with was Nurjehan Mawani, who's done a number of amazing things. And I last saw her in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, where she was running the Aga Khan Foundation programs. And we had a wonderful time there. She is now in Kabul, and I worry about her because I don't think that's the easiest place to be. But I think her activities really represent the kind of vision and reach that the Ismaili community has through the Aga Khan Foundation in taking the benefits of all that you have accomplished and your own sophistication, your own enlightenment to many other countries of the world to help communities develop and achieve their goals socially, economically, and politically. So it's an honor and delight for me to be here and speak to you today. I was asked when I spoke to the organizers to address the question of the role of women leaders. And in particular, they talked about the role of women in working with men to create a more ethical society. I want to address these issues, and I'm going to take a somewhat circuitous route that has something to do with my own development and understanding on the issues. Again, when I had my political retirement thrust upon me, as I've said, I had come out of a very interesting number of years where I had been the first woman to do many things, the first woman Minister of Justice, the first woman Defense Minister. And it's interesting, I remember my first NATO meeting, which happened to be a meeting with the North Atlantic Cooperation Council. This was back in 1993, when the North Atlantic Cooperation Council brought together the ministers of defense of the former Warsaw Pact countries in NATO. And I had been a Soviet specialist, and there was I sitting there in Brussels with the Russian minister, Pavel Grachov, across from me, and the Czech minister, and thinking, should they be here in NATO headquarters? I mean, is this all right? But it was a sign of the change, although recent history in Russia may suggest that my reservations were well-based. But I had experienced a lot of things that had perplexed me. And so after I had written a memoir, and I had gone off and I'd served for 4 years as Consul General in Los Angeles, I was invited to become one of the inaugural group of fellows at the new Center for Public Leadership at the John F. Kennedy School of Government. And while I was there, the dean said to me, well, when are you going to come and teach for us? So the next fall, I began as a professor of practice, they called me, at the Kennedy School. And I taught 2 courses. One was a course on democratic transition and consolidation, and the other was a course called Gender and Power. And in the course on gender and power, I was able to make use of a growing body of literature that began to appear in the 1990s that helped me to understand many of the things that I had experienced as a woman, being the first woman in the positions that I had held. And I came to understand it's not just gender, but when you are the first of your kind of person to hold a job that's traditionally been held by other kinds of people, there is a reaction that people have that isn't an intellectual reaction, it's a visceral reaction. I came to understand that we all have implicit attitudes that come from the lessons that we learn from the landscape from which we learn how the world works. A writer, Virginia Valian, wrote a book called Why So Slow? The Advancement of Women, and she calls these hypotheses that we create schemas, gender schemas. And from the time we're born, we are observing, we are learning, quite independent of what our parents or our school teachers or any of the other influences in our society try to teach us. We are learning the lessons of how our world works. And so as we get older, even though intellectually our values may change, there are still certain reactions that we have when we see something that doesn't correspond to the world as we think we know it. And so, for example, if you are the first woman prime minister, you will encounter that, particularly among the Ottawa Press Gallery. One of whose members once said to me with a visibly curled lip, you know, I've known every prime minister since Lester Pearson. And the implication was, and you don't look or sound like any of them, which was quite true. But what is interesting, that there was a psychologist at Harvard called Dr. Banerjee who created something called the implicit attitudes test. And implicit attitudes are these deeply rooted attitudes that we don't necessarily articulate. And I, of course, pride myself on being, very progressive on women's issues and the ultimate feminist. And I took her test. You sit in front of your laptop and you press keys as images flash. And there were two kinds of areas of attitudes that the test was looking at. I looked at the one dealt with gender. There was another one that dealt with age. And I was horrified to discover, after I had taken this test, that I associated men with science much more than women. And I thought, oh, this is terrible, because I, strongly support women in science. But all this did was point out that in my life, most of the scientists I had seen were men. So my implicit attitude was to think of scientist equals man. And I think it's very important for us to understand that when we have these implicit attitudes, we don't have them because we're bad, because we're mean, because we don't want to give people a chance. We have them because we're human. And very often, our intellectual attitudes, our social development has moved beyond those attitudes, but they still come and get in the way. And I'll give you an example. During the leadership campaign in 1993, a columnist called Lisanne Gagnon wrote about how she thought I was being treated very unfairly by the press relative to Jean Charest, that there was a lot of sexism. But interestingly enough, during the general election campaign, she wrote a column one time where she complained that I was always wearing the same earrings. Now, these were not sparkly, chandelier-type earrings, which would have been inappropriate to the prime ministerial earlobe. They were mild-mannered, inoffensive pearl earrings. But what I came to, and I couldn't figure it out. I thought, here's somebody, who had been so adamant about the sexism during the leadership campaign, and now she's writing this. What is this all about? Years later, when I began to read this literature, I came to understand that it wasn't about the earrings. There was something about me that made her uncomfortable. And maybe, and even women can be uncomfortable with women doing non-traditional things. Just because we're women doesn't mean we necessarily are on the barricades. We're products of a culture where leadership is often gendered masculine. And I'm not sure whether it was that I was a woman or maybe that I wasn't a Quebecer. That could have been it too. I don't know. It certainly wasn't the earrings. That was it. So in my life, I've come to understand, in the opportunity that I've had to do a lot of reading in social and cognitive psychology, come to understand that there are many ways in which we think, many ways in which we act, where we think we know why we're doing it, but we don't really know. And so one of the challenges that women have faced is to overcome the resistance that people have because they have preconceptions about what they're about. And there's a famous study, and if those of you who've heard about it, just roll your eyes while I tell you again. But one of the studies that I used in my course was one done by an economist at Harvard called Claudia Golden. And she was studying the way symphony orchestras audition to hire new musicians. And the great thing about reading the actual paper is that before she gets into her data, she talks about the interviews she has done with these symphony conductors. And they all say, oh, no, there's no gender bias in our selection. No, we're just interested in the quality of the playing. But a number of them say words to the effect of, but of course, you realize women do have small technique. So what she discovered is that when the orchestras audition behind a screen and with a carpet so that the adjudicators have no idea who's playing, they can't hear footsteps, they can't see who's playing, they hire anywhere from 35 to 55% more women. Because if you think you're going to hear small technique, you will hear small technique. And so we have to understand that as we are aiming to do things that traditionally people like us, whether it's women or people of color or disabled people, or there's all kinds of categories of people who encounter these kind of exclusionary predispositions, we have to understand that the deep attitudes, the resistance can be very visceral, and we have to work hard to overcome them.
Yalimadet, welcome, bienvenue, and thanks for joining us for Friday Night Reflections. My name is Zara Pranji, and I would love to welcome all of our Jamaati members, our multi-faith family members, as well as friends joining us from across the world, wherever you may be, on the couch like I am, by myself, in the house, out on the road, pulled over just to watch Friday Night Reflections, perhaps in the kitchen cooking. Thank you for tuning in. This has been a really fun tradition to be a part of, and so much so that I know you guys voted me back in to come here again, right? There's no one to ask, so I'm going to go with that. But really, the truth is, I was missing all of you, and I asked to be back for another Friday Night Reflections to spend some time with you and to really bring you this fun edition. It's always fun. No different this time. It's going to be an incredible experience, and I thank you for joining me. I'm here in my living room in British Columbia. It's been wonderful weather. I know Edmonton, that's had a little bit of a chilly spell. Calgary's had some snow. I can imagine Winnipeg's no better. It's getting a bit cooler out there. But here in BC, some of the most beautiful sunsets we've had in a long time. A lot of rain, but I love it. And I get to wear the sweater. So it's the season for sweater weather, soup. I know many of you have taken a liking to my bone broth, so not to worry, I have that prepared for tonight. So I hope wherever you are, you've got your bone broth, your chai, whatever you want. I have both, so not to worry. I know we've had some people concerned that I don't have chai and I don't have cookies, so just so you know, I have those here as well. Grab them, sit down with us, join us, and take part in this edition of Friday Night Reflections. It's been really busy here in BC. As some of you may know, we've got an election coming up. I know in other provinces, there's talks about that as well. Down south, across the border, the US is getting ready for their elections as well. It's really busy. And I must say, as a journalist, it is a crazy time right now. But that's not a bad thing. Elections means having discussions about politics, talking about those things that perhaps sometimes we don't discuss, talking about the issues, the big issues around the world, within our homes and our communities. And I encourage you, if you are in BC or if you are in a place that is going to be seeing an election very soon, inform yourself, learn a bit more, go out there, vote, have your voice heard. We're so lucky to have that ability. We're so lucky to be in a country where we are able to express our voices, so make sure you use it. Now, on the topic of the democratic process and getting involved, I'm really excited to introduce you to Nurjehan Mawani and Senator Mobina Jaffer, two women who are in my beautiful city in Vancouver, our city, I should say, and they are inspiring. They are good friends. I'm very lucky to also call them mentors and people that have really inspired me throughout my time in my industry, as well as wanting to learn more about women in leadership, women in politics, and powerful women making a difference, not only in BC and Canada, but across the world. These women have extensive resumes. I'll give you a little sneak peek into both of them. So Nurjehan Mawani has had a long and distinguished career with the Canadian Public Service, where she served as Commissioner of the Public Service Commission of Canada, advisor on diversity to the Canada School of Public Service. She has done so much. She's also been the chairperson of the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. She is extremely involved, and I know from speaking to her and from knowing her personally, she has a passion for making a difference in people's lives. She was born in Mombasa, Kenya, and is a lawyer and has practiced both in the UK as well as Canada. She's now based in Vancouver, like I said, right here where I am as well. Now, Senator Mobina Jaffer, she represents the province of British Columbia in the Senate of Canada, where she is Deputy Chair of the Standing Senate Committee on National Security and Defense. She also has a passion for making a difference in so many people's lives. She's touched so many lives. I can think back to the first day she was out there campaigning. I remember I was a child in Vancouver, and I remember her coming around and to see a smiley woman knocking on our door, telling us the change she wanted to make in the world, and to see what she's doing now. It's an absolute inspiration. She was born in Kampala, Uganda, and speaks 6 different languages, lives in Vancouver. Like I said, I guess everyone's just here this time. The weather's really good. What can I say? We had the pleasure of the company of both of them to learn a bit more from them, to gain insight, to learn about leadership and women in politics, women in leadership roles. And we got to explore their paths to success. I know many people out there, many women like myself, don't know how to get involved. what it takes to be a part of this. And to hear from them, really, it might just inspire you to take your next steps. So if you're wondering how to get involved, if you want to know what to do next, take a listen. This is definitely worthwhile. Now, we're going to preface the comments with excerpts from an interview of Maulana Hazare Imam in Harvard University in November 2015. Take a listen.
In the development network that you have created, spanning the world, I know education is a very big piece of this, from the Aga Khan universities to local education. That must be a daunting task. A few years ago, your daughter, Princess Zahra, was here and spoke at the Harvard School of Education about her role in this with a great attention to women's education. Yes. I'm not sure if that's a particular emphasis that you bring, but it certainly is one that is profoundly important.
Yes. My grandfather, in fact, pushed very hard to have women's education as part of our overall educational process. So that's part of the way we think, the way we live today. And now you were talking about universities, etc. And it's clearly a critical issue that in the developing world, the universities should upgrade their performance, and that their degrees should be recognized, that their research should be of global importance. And I was taught when I came to Harvard that plagiarism was a bad thing. Well, I'm here to plagiarize. And I don't hide it from Harvard.
When you talk about the cosmopolitan ethic that emerges from this recognition of difference, right, and yet a foundation in human oneness, right, the elements of that are what what would you say are the elements of a cosmopolitan ethic?
Well, I think first of all, you need to accept the premise that human society is pluralist, and it has been pluralist for as long as we know about the human race, if I'm not wrong. So there is a basic premise that has to be accepted. Now that issue of accepting pluralism also means that you need to attach equity to that notion. If there is no equity in pluralist societies, then you don't have functioning pluralist societies, you don't have institutions that function properly, etc. And I have admired a number of governments in developing countries, for example, where without saying it, they have fought very hard to create equal opportunity for various communities in various parts of the country, whereas that was not the case in colonial societies.
So equity would be one element of that.
Equity would certainly be one element.
That ethic. And a respect for justice, is that another piece of it, or how to...
Respect for justice, and I would say equal opportunity for the intelligentsia. Mm-hmm. I have seen situations where there has been an attempt to marginalize the intelligentsia of a given community. And that, of course, is an extremely unwelcome feature of a society.
One of the things I recall from having been involved with interfaith leaders, not that I'm one myself, but I'm an observer of these events, was the effort over a number of years ago to create a global ethic out of the distinctive ethical norms of different religious traditions and even of secular traditions. And there were certain things that everyone could agree on.
Yes.
And I think equality and justice and opportunity, dignity, etc., were very, very much agreeable. When it came to what equity meant, I hesitate to say that the biggest issue in equity among these dignified religious leaders was the issue of women and men. and whether gender equity, whether that really meant gender equity.
Right.
And it seems to me, that is an issue to a great extent, and yet my own impression of the Ismaili community is that leadership in Jamaat Khanas and other elements of the development network and leadership in these positions is shared by women and men. Am I right about that? Or?
Absolutely, and in fact, I spend considerable time trying to make sure that where there is leadership amongst women, the community can benefit from that. Leadership qualities is not gender-driven. Mm-hmm. So actually, if you don't respect the fact that both genders have competences, outstanding capabilities, you are damaging your community by not appointing those people.
So as we think about, I'm thinking now about the kind of responsibility that you have, both for the spiritual
right.
as well as the material well-being.
Right.
The welfare of the Ismaili community,
right.
but as you put it, it's not just the welfare of the Ismaili community, but those with whom
Absolutely.
they share their societies
Absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely.
So in those, are there societies in which you find it almost impossible to have the leadership of women in your own community rise?
No, not really. I think people tolerate our decisions. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure they're always welcome.
Mm-hmm. That seems to have struck a chord here.
I think the women in the audience know what I mean.
When I was very young, my father was a politician in Uganda. So I always wanted to be a politician, and my mother was a social worker. And so I saw both of them really going all out and doing, the extra mile. Like my mother would have arranged with USAID that there'd be dry milk in our house twice a week. So from the garage, people would come in lines and lines, and my father, because he was a politician, would have all these people. And I would see them make a difference. And so I always wanted to be a politician.
Well, I think the inspiration for me to get involved in public life really started possibly when I was growing up in Africa and at the Aga Khan school. But it really came into sharp focus when I was in the UK. And that was when I was appointed the legal member on the council for the UK. I was 26 years old, expecting my first child. And at that time, we were just beginning to deal with the aftermath of the Uganda exodus. We had a lot of Jamaat who were stateless. They were in the UK, they were in different parts of Europe, but stateless. And our role as the council and as the legal member, my role, was to work towards regularizing their status. So I initiated and we formed a legal advice center, brought in other lawyers as volunteers from the Jamaat, and set this up. And I think what I realized then was that we needed to engage. We needed to talk to, reach out to parliamentarians, to politicians, to ministers, to immigration officials, to find a way of finding a path forward to be able to regularize this status. And I think that was, for me, the most important inspiration to say, no, I think public service is the way to go.
So the factors that contributed to my success, there are many. First, I wanted to be a politician, as I said, but that was when we came here as refugees 50 years ago. That was not in the cards, I didn't think. So I absolutely had this thirst to become a lawyer, a successful lawyer. And so I worked really hard, and I still am a lawyer, and I still practice as a lawyer. So I worked really hard to make sure that I would be a lawyer. And I was a lawyer working on issues of violence against women, with refugee women, and in the criminal field, and also, of course, other fields, but I enjoyed every bit of it. So I think my success was because I'm passionate about what I do.
There are a number of factors. I would say that fundamentally, you need to get extremely competent at what you do. There is really no shortcut to that. I think once you do and you demonstrate that you can add value and that you are ahead of the curve, you're already thinking ahead, you are creative in terms of finding solutions, you find that people generally, even those who may have had questions about you because you were a visible minority, you were a woman, or began to realize that no, all those things were extraneous, that you were there and because you were actually competent and that you could add value. And then I would say that building alliances, building networks, and then alliances, because it's beyond networks, and then with like-minded people. I think for me also building trust was critical throughout my career, building trust with the people you work with the organization, but with stakeholders, so that it goes beyond that, because you're always building coalitions, especially in public service. I would say also grounding in faith, the values and ethics. Today there are so many competent people in the world, I mean, everywhere. So what is it that stands you apart? What is it that you bring? And people talk about it as soft skills, but I think those are now even more important because there is so much technical competence, professional competence. So what is it that makes you stand apart? And I would say that is your grounding, your walking your talk, that people know that you can be relied upon, that you are dependable, that what you say, you will follow through.
So as a Muslim woman, there have been challenges, but I am lucky. I am lucky because I'm an Ismaili Muslim woman. And then as an Ismaili woman, there's always been this support from our imam to excel. But my biggest challenge was when I became a senator. Imagine being the first Muslim senator and being sworn in a week after 9/11. So that was a big challenge for me. And immediately I was thrown into the terrorism legislation and went into meetings. And I would hear these things in the Senate, in the committee rooms about Muslims being terrorists, and I would really take offense at that, and I would challenge my colleagues. And you have to remember that I was a new senator. Many of them didn't even know me, and I had the audacity, and I was a woman, I had the audacity to ask. But at that time, I was very lucky. I had Mr. Chrétien, Prime Minister Chrétien, who was my greatest supporter. So I would go to him and say, look what they're doing. And I know that he called people and said, back off. You cannot call all Muslims terrorists. And then he started also talking in that way. But the other challenge I had is that the legislation was doing racial profiling. And I know because it was happening to my husband, it was happening to my son, so I knew racial profiling was existing. And I had to challenge the police commissioner then. And that, he absolutely was saying there was no racial profiling happening in Canada. And I would challenge him at every time. I was like a dog with a bone. I wouldn't give up. To this day, I will not give up in injustices like that. And as a new senator, he thought he could intimidate me, but I cannot be intimidated. I don't fear anybody. So my dad brought me up like that. But as a Muslim woman, it was very hard because there was this concept that Muslim women are submissive, are quiet. And often my colleagues would say, that was not my picture of you being a Muslim woman. And I would say to them, I'm a Canadian senator, and treat me like that. My faith is different. Just as I don't challenge your faith, you don't challenge mine.
So I think the first time I really confronted a very major challenge when I was appointed the chair of the Immigration and Refugee Board. Here I was, a woman, a visible minority, a Muslim at a time when, immigration and refugee issues are always controversial. Today, we know they're still controversial. And at the time, they were controversial in 1992. And there was a concern, I think, just going by some of the hate mail I received, that why do we need to have a woman born in Africa to tell us how we should handle our immigration and refugee policy? So I knew from that time that I was going to have some pushback on this. So and the fact that there was concern that how under her leadership will this institution now decide and make decisions, because they were very familiar with my predecessor, a great Canadian, well-known, and here I was, not a known quantity. I think that's really partly the issue. There is, of course, the issue that your profile is an issue, but I think there was this other aspect. Hazimam has often talked about a clash of ignorances, and I think these are sort of classic perceptions and prejudgments about individuals that can happen because people don't really know. So part of your role is to demystify and without saying so, showing by your actions that actually it doesn't matter. You are going to be guided by the law, and you're going to make decisions in a fair and just way. That was very important. Number two, though, equally, the fact that, I looked upon the fact that I had been appointed to this by the Prime Minister, by the government, meant that they were open and looking to have a perspective as a woman, as a visible minority, and perhaps as not necessarily as a Muslim, but the fact that we had a strong sort of faith community and faith background, that those were perspectives that actually could make for better policies and better decision making. Having those voices at the table. So I think that was I took that to help me to think, no, there was a reason for this, and I've got to move. I was also very aware that Hazimam had given very particular guidance about the importance of public service. So that was another factor that here I was, and it was true that I, in a way, felt that I had to succeed, because if I somehow didn't, that would be a statement on women, on visible minorities, and on Muslims, remembering that it was the first senior appointment, I think, of a Muslim in Canada in the public service, as at the level of deputy minister.
There is no doubt that pluralism and the sense of justice and equality are being challenged at the moment. And a lot of that I contribute to what's happening in the South. And, there's a big country next to us, and obviously that's the television we watch. And so it is absolutely going to come here. Thing happened in the U.S. with George Floyd. And so ever since then, I have been at the Prime Minister to recognize systemic racism. And when the commissioner did not recognize that there was systemic racism in the RCMP, the Prime Minister heard from me many times. We are not there. So there's a lot of work to be done. I have even asked for a special committee to be formed to deal with injustices. Today we have more Aboriginal people in prison than their percentage in Canada. We have more black people in prison than the percentage of population in Canada. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. And I believe it's my role to point out at every point, every opportunity I have that I won't accept it. So, since COVID has happened, every Thursday I convene a call with about between 40 to 60 women around the world. I'm the chair of what's an organization that's called ICANN. And we hear from women all around the world. Because in 2002, I was Canada's envoy to Sudan. And I went into all kinds of rebel areas to negotiate peace. And so since then, I have made this connection with women from all over the world to look at issues of violence. There are issues of violence against women here that are unacceptable, and there are issues of violence around the world. And I believe that if there's violence anywhere against women, we have to talk about it. You know, yesterday was Day of the Girl, and I had many Zoom calls around the world. And it really was important to get across to the world that all girls are not treated equally, right? There is female genital mutilation. There's more child marriage than ever has been for a long time. And so we have to speak not just of what's happening in Canada, but we have to be the voice for women around the world. I feel really privileged that we came to Canada. It was not an accident that Ismailis came to Canada. I know, we all know that we came to Canada because our Imam brought us here. He brought us here for a reason. He gave us the most privilege that anybody else in the world has. With that privilege comes responsibility. And I believe each of us has a responsibility to speak for our brothers and sisters around the world.
Now, when 9/11 happened, I can tell you that the public service was in some confusion as to how to deal with all with the Muslims in the public service, what they were feeling, but more, I would say, almost more concerned at the time of what the reaction was going to be. And there was reaction all around us, as you know. You know, there was hostility, there was suspicion, there was fear of neighbors, people were even, I remember a young boy in Ottawa who was actually killed, and he was a Sikh. And people were so ignorant, not that you kill anybody, but people were so ignorant that they didn't even know the difference. But it was just the other, I would say, the whole concept. Right. So we had in the Privy Council office, the clerk of the Privy Council, and I'll always remember this. He called me and he said, Nurjehan, you are the senior most public servant, Muslim, in the government. So would you come and talk to the deputy minister's breakfast and explain and share your perspectives on what has happened and how we should react to this? So I have to tell you that I was quite nervous. I mean, these were not, we now reflect and we forget that how those were difficult, very challenging times. So the first thing that I did when I met with the deputy minister community was to repudiate the act of 9/11, the terrorist act, and to repudiate it and to say that this was completely antithetical to Islam. This was a crime, and that no one condones this, and that Islam does not. To the contrary, I reminded them that in Islam, you are reminded that if you save one life, it is as if you have saved humanity. So my purpose was to make them feel at ease that, we had the same values. It wasn't that because I was a Muslim that for some reason I was going to approve of this act. Now, why? Because that had happened. There were some Muslim faith leaders at the time who had made some sort of justification that it was because of this. I mean, there may be some underlying concerns, but this was a terrorist act. And so it was very important the moment I did that, the conversation took a completely different turn. And I was able to go and explain. I was able to use so much of the guidance from the Imam that Imam has given us, and the clash of ignorances, and to talk about, and then when I finished, several deputy ministers came over to talk to me and said, Nurjehan, would you be prepared to come and talk to our senior management teams? I mean, that was a breakthrough. It gave a certain sense of confidence to the Muslims in the public service. But not only Muslims. I got messages from other visible minorities to say, because it was in a way, you became a sort of champion. But you became a champion for equity, for equality, for tolerance, for understanding, and above all, about Canadian values, that this is what Canada is about. And so I think that was a maybe completely unexpected outcome, of my being in the public service at the time. Nobody expected 9/11, but I was there. Now, if I hadn't been there, that opportunity would not have been possible. So that's why I'm encouraging everyone, all our Jamaat, to take a career in the public service as being very important because of the influential role that you can play. I can give you other examples, but this one, I think, has always stayed with me.
So the greatest area of success for the Canadian Jamaat has been, what Hazrat Imam's done for us. I always say that Hazrat Imam comes here, he opens the doors for us, and then we go in and we finish what he started, right? So we are very lucky that we have an Imam that constantly looks out on how he can open doors for us, right? Like when the parks are formed, it is he who does it. When this amazing place was built, I was in the council at that time when this Jamaat Khana was built. And I can't begin to tell you the detail and the time he spent in each and every aspect of this building. I was so humbled when Hazrat Imam came and sat in our prayer hall to see how the light in the morning would affect the Jamaat. He came at 4 a.m. So we are lucky. We are lucky because he comes to open the doors for us. And so we have had, in the last 50 years, better integration with the community outside, because when he comes, people come to know about him, and that's what's opening the doors.
The Jamaat's settlement in the country and the Jamaat has been amazing, really. 50 years seems like a long time, but actually it isn't, because when you really think of the profile and the demographics of the Jamaat that came, it was a lot of them, the Jamaat came as refugees, and in circumstances where there was a very big transition that needed to be made. It was the thirst for education, wanting to excel, to be really good at what you do, but that came from where? Guidance from the Imam. We had started this. Imams had started our schools for more than over 100 years. Number 2 is that this adaptability that I talk about. And I think that too may also come from having been sort of minorities in many countries. Not in all countries, but in many, many countries. The Jamaat has been entrepreneurial. And that entrepreneurial spirit has enabled us to look for opportunities. And then institutions. Look at our Jamaati institutions that have been established in, let's talk about Canada, since we are in Canada, from the Ismaili centers where we are sitting here today. I remember the opening of this center, and I remember the sense of pride and a sense of belonging and a sense that we've arrived. Now we are here. Hazrat Imam's message about make Canada your permanent home. Very important, resonating that this is our country and we are here, and we are here to stay. We are here to contribute. And institutions helped us in that hugely. Our Jamaati institutions and our Imamat institutions look at the Aga Khan Foundation Canada is a household name. If we look at the Aga Khan Museum, we look at the Global Center for Pluralism, we look at the delegation of the Ismaili Imamat, and we look at, and the Jamaat Khanas to me have been very central in terms of our identity. In terms of, you can be Canadian, but you can have multiple identities. There is absolutely no incongruity between that. We now must no longer see ourselves as a Jamaat that has just, settled very well. We are beyond that now. Where we are Canadian, contributing Canadians, and we have to see ourselves as mainstream, again, maintaining our identity, our faith and identity. This is the genius of Canada, that we can be Canadian and have multiple identities.
So I think we've done very well on the outside. We could do more. I, of course, as a politician, want more of our young people to become politicians. But they are. Many are coming, and I'm very proud of that they are looking at their profession. But if I was going to challenge the Jamaat, I would say we've done well in integrating outside. I am very concerned about how we are integrating amongst us. Now we are a very diverse Jamaat, and I worry about that how are we integrating amongst ourselves? We have Jamaati members from Afghanistan, we have Jamaati members from India, Pakistan, East Africa, from French-speaking countries. How are we integrating amongst ourselves? And I think that is a challenge we all have to talk about, is how are we integrating within ourselves? Because, if I know that, and I won't give name of place, but if we go to a certain city, they say, oh, that's an Afghani Jamaat, and that's an East African Jamaat Khana. That's not acceptable. That's not our Imam's vision. So I think there's work to be done on that.
The message is that it's very important for all voices to be heard and to be at the table. So to youth, we need youth voices to make better public policy. We need women's voices to make better public policy. We need the voices of different communities, and here we are talking about the Jamaat. So we're talking about Central Asian Jamaats. We are talking of the diversity, the South Asian Jamaat, the Jamaat that has come from Africa, the Jamaat that is coming from different places Iran, Syria, Jamaat is coming here. Those voices, and I was really encouraged all the youth from all the diversity within the Jamaat to get engaged.
We are a very comfortable Jamaat. And not for a minute am I forgetting my brothers and sisters who are really struggling at the moment. I know that because I work with them daily. And I'm not telling any of my brothers and sisters who are having real challenges, especially during this COVID period, that I'm blind to that. But generally what exists around the world, we are a very comfortable Jamaat. We have a lot of luxury. But I believe a time has come that we should be opening those doors in the next 50 years. So Imam's work can be focused everywhere else. And I think the other place I'd like to see our Jamaat is that we should lead even more in international work. Hazrat Imam has started that, and with our programs, we do go overseas. But I think this has to come from us.
I would submit that we are a strategic asset for this country. And for this country, which is our country. So as Canadians. So when John Stackhouse in his book Planet Canada and in his op-ed piece talks about diaspora diplomacy, I immediately thought of the Ismaili community. Because we are such an incredible example of the world right here in Canada. And if I think of TKN, I mean, contributing globally, not only in institutions. Look at what we are doing in institutions already. Leadership of institutions by Canadians, Canadian Jamaat as well. But I'd like to also see that we do more of that, much more of that, in every field.
My father was in politics because he wanted to change lives of people around. He wanted to change lives of Ugandans. You know, he fought, in fact, he was one of the 6 people who originally organized independence fight in Uganda. And the president very recently of Uganda recognized him for that. But what I'm saying, have a purpose. Don't join politics for the status. Don't join because you want to be a politician. Join if you have a purpose. So I will share with you what my purpose is. My purpose of sitting at the table is to have equality of women and of us, the community, of people of color. I fight every day. My colleagues know that I will not give up. And my colleagues know that I will not seek a position just to give up on my values or what my convictions are. So I say to young people, please join politics, but join it if you have a purpose. Don't join it because you want status, because status is very temporary and it's superficial. I have survived for 50 years in politics because I absolutely believe that I'm equal to every man and every Canadian, and I will not accept second position, whether it's in the community or outside. I have a big fight still left, and I will continue fighting.
I would say also, Canada in a way has, forgive me, but has lost its place of influence in the world. I have served abroad for almost 15 years, and I can tell you that we don't have the same, we are not punching, not even at our weight, forget above our weight. And I sincerely believe that we as the Jamaat, as Canadians, can play a really important role in bringing back to Canada that role of influence in the world through our networks. Through our networks, we have very phenomenal. So competence, yes. As I said, this world is not lacking in very, very bright, competent people. But we have a phenomenal strategic asset, which is the Ismaili network globally. And we can leverage that for not only the betterment of Canada, for the good of Canada, but for the good of the world. Sitting right from here, right from Canada.
See, what did I say? I'm sure this conversation has changed someone's life. It was so good, I forgot to have the bone broth and the tea. So I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. This was a little bit of a sneak peek into some of the changes we ourselves can make in this world. I hope their conversation, their tidbits, their paths to success, their stories were able to inspire you to know that you too can follow down that path. You too can be a female in leadership. You too can make a difference. Now, before I let you go, one last piece to go to. Music. Music is here to inspire us. Music lifts us during times like COVID-19 when a lot of stuff just doesn't make sense. We are here to showcase some of the talented work within our community, some talented artists as well. I really look forward to that each week, and I hope you'll stick around to take a listen. And as always, stay safe, enjoy, and we'll see you next Friday.
Heaven calls me with its rain and thunder. 100,000 cries. Yet I cannot hear. All I hear is the call of my beloved.
जी पधारो जी पधारो जी पधारो पधारो 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 जी पधारो जी पधारो जी पधारो जी पधारो